What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the First Class Lacrosse podcast. Conference tournaments were electric in women's lacrosse last weekend, notably Northwestern and North Carolina getting huge conference wins. Men's conference tournaments kick off this week and weekend, and we have a ton of great matchups. We're thrilled today to have Cornell attackman Michael Long and CJ Kirst joining us. I'm joined by my co-hosts Stephen Rafis and Matt Dunn. Matt, I'm going to pass it off to you to introduce today's segments.
Awesome. Thanks, Seamer. Pretty similar layout here where we will kick it off with our 2-minute drill led by Stephen Rafis. Then we're getting right into the player's perspective, which, as Deemer just mentioned, is an interview with Michael Long and CJ Kirst of Cornell. After that, we will get into our GPUs, which are our games, players, and units, where we highlight those from the prior weekend. Next, we'll get into the breakdown, where we're going to discuss some dodging slides and re-dodging as an offensive player versus over carrying. So getting some thoughts on how offensive players can think about ways to not let defenders off the hook when they have bad approaches and bad slides. And then we will wrap it up by looking ahead at some big games this upcoming weekend. Steven, take us to the 2-minute drill.
Thanks, Matt. So last weekend, big weekend in the men's game as well. Saw some high-level teams just with their season actually coming to an end. In the Big Ten, Penn State beating Hopkins by 13-12. Hopkins season, they are done. In the ACC, Duke beat UVA. They continued their regular season streak. I believe it's 20 straight games that they've beaten them. Overtime win, UVA season is now done. Another game in the Big Ten, Rutgers beating Michigan 11-8. This game was at Michigan. Michigan's season has now concluded. Two other games that stood out to us, just Notre Dame beating Penn 10-8. This one was closer than I think a lot of people may have thought, and Notre Dame scored 8 second-half goals. That's back-to-back weeks of Notre Dame having a really strong second half. And then finally, probably the biggest game of the weekend, UNC 14, Syracuse 12. Big game in the Dome, huge win for UNC. Most likely locked themselves in for a potential home game in the NCAA tournament. On the women's side, Deemer shouted out early, but UNC won the ACC championship over BC 14-12, and Northwestern won the Big Ten championship over Maryland 8-7. That was a low-scoring affair. Notable performances, keeping it short this week, only 4 shout-outs. First has to be to CJ Kirst, who we're about to have on. Broke the all-time record for goals in a career, 225. That's an insane number. Don Petramala, UNC attackman, 6 goals versus Syracuse. He was electric. Massive win for them. And then 2 guys on Duke. We shouted them out last week, but Aiden McGuire and Mac Christmas. The cause turnover to transition versus UVA that led to their overtime winner. Just had to shout the 2 of them out. They've been, incredible and playing some of their best lacrosse right now. And then lastly, on the women's side, Chloe Humphrey, who we've talked about a decent amount on this podcast, and I'm sure we'll talk about her more into May. ACC tournament MVP. She was 3-2 versus BC in the final. Incredibly impressive. So those are our notable performances. Looking forward to another exciting weekend of college lacrosse.
We're less than 5 minutes in, and you both have already snuck in electric. I feel like I gotta throw one in now.
It reminds me of Booker Corrigan's race to Nifty.
The race to Nifty, yeah.
The race to electric. We might have to start after this week. One thing that stands out to me is I can't remember a time in men's lacrosse where so many, historical powerhouse programs were playing to get into the tournament at risk of an at-large, bid not going their way, between a lot of these different teams. Even, again, Duke with a must-win last weekend against UVA to just shore up their at-large resume. I think that just makes for more exciting lacrosse, and every weekend you can imagine the stress and the nerves and the excitement around each matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've spoken about this a few times. It's just like the last 5 years or so, and a few of them, you've kind of had some of these teams really emerge. I feel like as very, dominant teams, and others fall off. But I think we'll see even in conference play right now, you keep your eye on the Big Ten. Any of those teams can really emerge at the 4 left, just based off how the season's been so far. Similarly in ACC play coming up. So it'll be interesting to see. That being said, we do have an interview coming up. I say, guys, let's get to players' perspective here with CJ Kirst and Michael Long.
Guys, welcome. We're excited to have both of you, 2 guys out of New Jersey, high school teammates. And, we love watching you guys play. And, we just want to say appreciate you guys coming on as you prep for the Ivy tournament. And, excited to chop it up with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for the time, guys. Appreciate it. Big fans of first class lacrosse, so happy to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Well, guys, to kick us off, first off, both of you guys have had some milestone, seasons. CJ, congrats on eclipsing the NCAA goal record. Mike, you eclipsed 100 assists and 200 points earlier this season. Both super impressive. Big fans of your guys' game. But I want to take it back to high school a bit, and I know you guys are, again, two humble guys, but talk a little bit about the chemistry that you guys have built from high school into college, and how your guys' relationship has evolved along the way.
Yeah, so I'll step in here. I think the first cool piece about it, we were talking about it later this week, but I actually took CJ on his first visit to Del Barton when he was in 8th grade and I was a freshman. So I remember my coach Rubling is a legendary coach in New Jersey. Still, he was brought me in. And he was like, "Hey, I got this kid." And obviously, I know who CJ was, but he was like, show him around a good time, like he's one we want. And I remember taking him around, and CJ's very similar to how he is now, even. But that kicked off, what's been a dream come through, but a hell of a ride, and we're hoping to keep it going, a month down the stretch here.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, it's been pretty wild, I guess, this week. Talking to people from home, just thinking about how, it was great getting that final assist from Mikey, but I really haven't played a lacrosse game without him. It's since sophomore year, which is pretty wild. So we've done a lot together, and even when we're home, every single time we're picking up our sticks, we're always together, and Mike's always making the trip to Burnsville, picking me up. It goes a long way. We're putting in the work, I guess, as sophomores and juniors in high school, and then, playing together now. So, pretty fortunate to have the opportunity to, play with him every single time, a game comes around. Pretty wild.
Curious for you two, you've played together for so long. If you two could just comment on kind of the other's game and, maybe something that player has, always been really good at, but something that they've also gotten better at, throughout the time. It's been almost 8 years or so. Would love to hear that perspective.
First things first. I mean, talking about it's just pretty cool, but I'm a 6th-year senior, which is kind of unheard of in this sport. But you asked me kind of what are the reasons I'm still playing, and a lot of it has been that ride, and CJ's been a big part of it. But the message there is like you just got to enjoy what you're doing every day, and we realize we only have a month left of this, but these are the best days of our lives, and he's been a big part of it. But back to your question there, kind of, I think CJ, he's always been a pretty well-rounded guy. I think when I first started playing with him, he was a pretty small kid, which a lot of people don't talk about today. And he's laughing, but I don't say it as a joke. So I think he had to learn to play kind of as an undersized guy, playing against some high-level competition. When he was a sophomore at Del Barton, and so he's learned kind of how to be extremely crafty. But then when he hit the growth spurt, which is still going in my eyes. He's gotten that other element of his game where he's powerful and can run through guys. But I think the biggest piece of his development that I've seen, it's been pretty cool to watch, is it sounds pretty simple, but it's how he shoots the ball. I remember 2 summers ago, he went up and spent the summer in Canada playing with some of my buddies in box. And he came back, and he's always been a hell of a shooter. Don't get me wrong, but he came back with, more of a point in focusing on how he's releasing the rock. And I think that's gone a long way. Deemer, I saw you put out something earlier about, his numbers and his stats, but every single time I pass the ball, it's a different release, and it's calculated, it's methodical, and he's thinking about what the goalie's thinking about. So, I give him a ton of credit, but that's one thing I've noticed over the last 3 years that, he's taken huge strides in. That it takes a high level lax guy to really see it in the moment, but it's impressive.
The tweet that Mikey's referring to, I just alluded to how, shooting percentage is up for CJ this year, but his on goal shooting percentage, we did an analytics, presentation this week with Zach Capazzi, and CJ scoring 77% of shots that hit the net. So I think the takeaway was some deception and the release points, which I think is something that it's not always talked about. We always talk about guys getting shots, period. But, that increase in deception, and really see it with a lot of you guys at Cornell. You guys are clearly all working on that craft. So just chiming in on that piece, which is definitely a great stat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to hear. I'm off Twitter, to be honest, so I didn't really know that, but no, that's pretty cool. I think I guess I had the opportunity to go play box 2 summers ago, and honestly didn't score very much, so it was pretty tough. And I going home back to Andrew Dalton's house, my teammate here, and trying to talk to him about it, being like, dude, I can't score the rock. It's pretty frustrating. So then coming back here, shooting on a 6x6, kind of made it a lot easier when you think about a leaner, a twister, stuff like that. But then I even talked to my brother Connor, and shooting on my brother Colin. Like, I think just learning that, put it to a great spot with your body going at a different angle, I think, goes a long way. Cause my brother Connor can always, he only aims top right, and that's the only shot he ever puts it on frame. So, just seeing how he's able to deceive the goalie with either his shoulder, his head, it's something I learned. But I guess going back to that first question, talk about Mike. First of all, thanks, Mike. Really, really appreciate those kind words. But I think something people don't really look at, when you look at the stats, is that Mike can score the ball as much as anyone else. He's just such a selfless player where, I don't think I'd be the player I am today because, having Mike play ex-attackman and in high school, and then his early years here, and then going to the right side, like every single time I'm off ball, I know his eyes are up, and whenever we make eye contact, I should expect something. So I think that's kind of the first thing that people should understand, is that his passing ability is through the roof, and then even through that, his lacrosse IQ, I think, is something that people don't really understand as much as I do, playing with him, because every single night we pull up film, or we're just chat at home, or even talking to Coach Pusick. Mike reads the field better than anyone else, and whether he's playing behind the goal or playing on the right wing, he knows that anyone on the field can be in a better position to score, or someone could be doing a better job to open something else. So I think his lacrosse IQ is through the roof, and something that he's worked on a lot, and has made me even a better player just talking to him through that.
Yeah, I would just go off that, again, for anyone who's listening and, going through the stats and getting themselves familiar, Mike's a career 44% shooter, which is fantastic. But I think what's even more impressive to me, the balance between goals and assists is virtually 1-to-1, which, again, like, it also speaks to, and I think we all, offense or defense, can relate to, year over year, your role can change. The spots on the field can change, and what coaches are asking you to do and what the team needs evolves. And one thing I thought too, that I would love to hear your guys' perspective on, is the emergence of Ryan Goldstein, stepping into really that true X quarterback position. Like, Mike, you're all over the field, you're slashing, you're popping, but you're still quarterbacking. You're just, less traditional. Ryan's back there wheeling and dealing and playing the pipes and giving you guys the freedom. Can you guys talk just a little bit about his growth from freshman to sophomore year?
Yeah, 100%. First things first. I mean, I think it's a testament to, our offense in Coach Busick, obviously, but it's player and individual agnostic, right? We have the faith in each other that there's always a right play in front of you, right? And we've trust in every of those 6 guys on the field that they're going to make that right play. Ryan, obviously, he came in to the lineup midway through last year, in the shuffle of things, and he hasn't really looked back. But I think he's such a dynamic player. He's a jitterbug. He plays a lot. He could shake a guy off the end line any single time, the whistle blows. But we talk about IQ. That guy has a lax IQ, like few other guys I've ever met. He reads the field and he thinks about things in real time. He's thinking about where the help is coming from the defense, but also, where the 2-slide is and where that through pass lane could be for him. So let alone his athleticism, what he could do with his legs, and then as a dynamic playmaker, he understands how well to play that X role. And so switching the field, when the ball is coming down the alley on CJ's side, getting it up to my side, and vice versa, that's really where he helps us out so much. And I think his his numbers speak for himself, obviously, but that's not really what we look at. And we know when there's more opportunity to be had, and he's just doing a great job. He's a great piece for us, and it also selfishly takes some pressure off me. I get to do a ton of different things, and we always know what we're going to get from CJ. So it's been great so far. We're just obviously, you get down to tournament time, and you're looking ways to level up. How can we perfect this and then make it even more of a well-oiled machine? So I'm excited to see what we do on Friday and hopefully beyond. But all good things out of Ryan.
To add on to that, Mike kind of, covered a lot there, but the one thing I admire most out of Ryan is, his competitiveness. He's on the smaller side, and he knew that coming into college, but man, that guy doesn't fear anyone. And it's pretty impressive to see during practice how, when there's scraps on the field, he's always involved somehow in some way. And, it starts with that and his freshman fall, knowing that the guy's fearless. And, it's always someone I want to play with. And it's great. Every single time he's got the ball on a stick, he's trying to make a play. And, every single time he picks the ball from the end line, he wants to square up his guy. He wants to go to the rack and do something. So, he's fearless, and, it's awesome playing with him.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, I want to transition here a little bit. A few times you guys have mentioned, Coach Busick and giving credit to teammates and coaches, but I'm curious to hear more about, the coaching staff. Coach Stevens, Coach Busick, they're guys I played with and against. I got to play a few years professionally with Coach Stevens. I still talk to him pretty regularly. Coach Busick's a guy I played, lost to Cornell in the playoffs in college, beat them one year, and we've competed for many years. And they're, younger guys that kind of took over a historic program and have really, continued to elevate the success of it. And I'm really interested to hear from you guys, what is it about them that has allowed you guys to be successful? And what is it with the culture that they're maintaining and building at Cornell?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot there. I could speak a lot on it. I came in, like I said, I'm a 6-year senior. So Coach Busick and Coach Stevens, their first year in their new roles was actually post-COVID, my sophomore, junior, whatever you want to call it. So, I like to think, we've grown up a lot together, with CJ included. But I think the biggest thing in our whole program's a lead by example program, right? You're going to get respect by doing the right and the hard things. And the first piece to that is knowing that those two guys have gone through it, right? Not just gone through it, excelled at it, and set the standard for us. So that's the easiest thing. You have inherent respect for those guys, knowing that they went through all we are going through now. So that's one piece. The other piece is, I think, and I'll speak more offensively too. I think Coach Busick does a great job, but as with anything, there's always a line between, letting your guys be lacrosse players and trying to leverage that, but and also, giving the X's and O's and trying to make your point as a coach heard. And it's something I think he's done extremely well, and he's continuing to improve on, and, letting our natural ability and our talent shine, while also, when it's time, when we're getting a little off track, getting us back and telling us the right ways. I think Coach has done a great job of leveling up his, the best way I describe it is he gives his coaching points in a very digestible way. So even the freshmen or the sophomores, or, you got a guy that isn't, as much of a lax rat, or maybe CJ and I are, he's telling them something. It's extremely easy to understand. And he's always giving the, why are we doing this? Talking high level defensive points about what they're thinking about and how it's going to change what we do. And so I think that's the biggest piece, is he gives digestible points, and also, knowing that he went through the things we're going through now, it just means the world to us. And it's two guys that you want to play for.
Mike covered a lot there, but, kind of just to touch on one more thing. I think it starts in the fall here. When you first step on campus as a freshman, is that, you learn that these seniors and the guys who have been here for 4 years, that it's their team. And I think the coaches, do a great job of letting the seniors grow up and, run practice or run a lift, and, have the ability to make sure that we're meeting that standard every day. And, when you get in the film room, you hear from the coaches, no doubt. On the field, if you're not bringing it, you'll hear from them. But, I think having Coach Busick and Coach Stevens, go through the process, like Mike said, they understand that big part of the ride is, having those senior leaders set the tone every day. And, I think that's my biggest takeaway as a freshman was, that trust that they had in those captains and those seniors. And then, now being in the position that I am today, having those meetings with the coaches, trying to make sure that, they're putting us in the best place to be successful, and and then trickling down from there, making sure that we're doing our jobs with the younger guys, leading the right way. I think that's a huge part of our culture here as well. From our strength coach, Coach Halley, who's been here forever, and coached our coaches. Just knowing that we have a standard to meet. We have that Cornell tradition that we want to follow, and we have our pillars, but really starts at the top, of a senior class, and we have a tremendous senior class of like 16 guys who have played a national championship, have been in those positions that we're trying to achieve. So it starts with the coaches putting us in those positions. So it's been awesome playing with them, and it's been incredible.
One thing I did want to touch on, just with like the Cornell standard, watching you guys play on film, but then I got the chance to watch you guys play live against Syracuse. Your offense in particular, you guys move the ball pretty unlike any other team in college, and I think you guys are incredibly unselfish. But at the same time, going through our like notable games performances, like your offense has basically been on there every week, right? We've talked about all the stats. You guys lead the country in assists per game, like shooting percentage. So from like the unselfish perspective, could you guys talk a little bit about that, and maybe what that looks like, a part of like the Cornell standard, the Cornell culture?
Yeah, I think just to start off, I mean, CJ said it great, but you come in in the fall here pretty early, and we do a lot before we even get to anything like X's and O's or playing lacrosse. And even the first 2-3 weeks of practice are very, rudimentary and getting back to the basics. So all of that is done to kind of recenter ourselves and make sure, I think the best way I could say it is that the program is bigger than you are. And I really I think our coaches do a great job recruiting. So most guys that come through the door, already have that kind of sense to them. But if they don't, it's getting knocked out of them in 2-3 weeks. And so it's a full year-long process. So when you get to January, you get running, get playing 6v6 or whatever. Those kind of inherent principles trickle into those sets. And so speaking offensively, I mean, I just think for us over the last 3 years, and we've had a lot of the same pieces in, there are days when we're spinning it, and days when, some days we're looking to take more shots than others. And it's such a clear difference. It's day and night between those two when, we're working for the best opportunity versus, taking a pretty good opportunity. I think we all realize, we're all pretty good individually. We're probably going to be able to get a shot off or a good look most times whenever we want it. But it's the let's work, let's grind down the shot clock and see if we can get a doorstep look. I think that's really the difference between past years and this year is leveling up. We want to level up, keep leveling up. You see a good step down look with an approach screaming out to you, there's probably something else on the backside that's going to be even more wide open. But again, I think it's a culture theme that trickles into how we play, and that's the biggest foundation for it.
Yeah, I think one more thing to add on top of that, just more mentality basis, understanding everyone's strengths, us three attackmen, being able to, dodge both hands, and, Mike and I being able to go from the high wing, low wing, goalie at X, and then understanding that we're playing with 6th grade midfielders who Willem Firth, pretty much could be a starting attackman. He, unreal left hand who, is great off ball and knows how to play the 2-man game. Hugh Kelleher, we put him in position to run as fast as he can and run by his matchup, because we know that that's the best part of his game. And then, guys like Andrew Dalton who are just slippery inside. I think we just complement each other well, where, like Mike said, I'm going to pass up taking a righty shot because I know, Mike's going to be on the backside catching it, looking inside for Firthy or Dalt's cutting with his left hand. And then, just having a constant conversation out there, I think has been the biggest theme for us this year. We all have, a lot of experience, especially with Mike and I and Huey and Daltz being the seniors and Ryan Sheehan, but being able to, have a conversation on the backside or on the inside, and just those little things. Cause when there's 30 seconds on the shot clock, you might want to speed up, that you're going to find a better look, when there's 15 or 10. So, I think that's been the biggest thing for us to be successful this year.
I'll just close it up too. I think CJ's last point there with the communication piece is huge. I think something I've thought about more this year than in the past. I've always been a pretty good communicator, but I got bumped up to the right wing mid last season, and it's allowed me to, just be closer to the most of the offense. And instead of screaming, I'm working on the backside with, a midfielder, I could literally turn to him and tell him exactly what I want him to do. And we can have those conversations through the offensive flow. And that's just allowed us to all be on the same page, which is more valuable than anything else.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear you guys talk about this. I mean, I think, you know, I'll speak for Steve and Matt, but I think all of us really appreciate the subtleties and the smaller parts of the game, and like to see even, you know, the examples of what you guys are talking about from watching film this spring, like guys are winding up for jump shots, but then throwing the ball cross crease. You know, there's always that awareness around trying to get better, you know, and trying to understand each other. But one thing I want to just touch briefly on, CJ, you kind of mentioned jokingly earlier, like you're not, you know, on social media too much. And I think, you know, we caught the beginning stages of it, but then you guys have really lived it the last 8 to 10 years of this growth in social media. And just, you know, that environment. And I think again, whether it's individual or team, that can be hard, from whether it's pressure or comparing yourselves. And we've got a lot of young lacrosse players that, you know, follow our content and listen to our stuff. And would love to hear, CJ, like when you mentioned that, is that just something that you've used to help you, you know, stay focused? You know, how has eliminating some of that social media been a positive for you, and just trying to, you know, keep the main thing and stay on track?
Yeah, you know, I think I first did it, I guess, my freshman year when some of the seniors were joking about it, you know, towards the middle of the year. And then, you know, this year we kind of came back, you know, and guys were kind of off it for New Year's resolution. And then, you know, I know Mikey did it a couple weeks ago, but, you know, I totally think it's, you know, trying to stay locked in as much as possible, and, you know, not try to, you know, see the outside noise, and, you know, just realize that, you know, that what you have inside the locker room, and, you know, what you have, you know, at home with, I guess our 8 best friends that we live with, you know, that, you know, every single day you're showing up just to go play lacrosse. And, you know, you don't need to go worry about all that stuff, you know, outside of it. But, you know, I still do love getting on the social media and partaking in that. You know, it's been a huge part of staying locked in, and, you know, not trying to think of anything else. Cause, you know, even if you don't want to believe it, you know, when you do scroll it and stuff like that, you see other stuff out there, you know, and I think that's kind of been the biggest part of our team, you know, staying locked in, and not, and, you know, trying to only focus on the day to day and the guys inside our locker room.
Yeah, Deemer, I think you brought it up earlier, but obviously I do a ton of coaching as well, and there's definitely a generational shift to this type of thing. But we've kind of been in it the whole time, the social media age. But one thing I was thinking about the other day was, you know, as far back as I remember, you know, the best players that, you know, whether in the New Jersey or in the state, or playing in college or whatever, they were never posting about themselves, or even the good times that they have with their teams until maybe the end of the year, right? It's something I see more and more, and I talk to some guys about. I just, you know, the message to the younger guys is don't put anything out there that, you know, could possibly be used as fuel. And also, back to CJ's point, just things happen internally, and it's best to deal with them yourself. And just adding in the new variable, social media, can just complicate things, and you don't want that. So, you know, I think we'd be much better off if we didn't have it, but obviously it's not changing anytime soon.
Yeah, don't get too boomer on us, but we hear that for sure. And we've, you know, we've kind of tried this balancing act since, you know, we have started doing this. And I always tell the story that even when we were starting FCL, like posting about what we're doing is kind of this awkward self-promotion thing, you know, like we're trying to put it out there, put great stuff on content, just like you're trying to put a great product on the field. But it's not always very natural, you know. And I'll say, just like one example, I think that's a quick no brainer for kids out there, is if you lose a game, like reposting your own clips, I think that sends a weird message, you know. And, you know, not something that you guys need to comment on, but I'll just say that, like, that to me is something that I think people are put in those situations more and more. When you lose a game, you should be pretty pissed off, to be honest. You know, it's the, you know, the smiles and the social media and all that stuff. It's, you know, hard to engage with. But let's move on here. We got better stuff to talk about, but it's definitely a great topic, and appreciate you guys' perspective on it.
Yeah, one question I have, and CJ, you kind of just hit on this on a personal level, and I think this just hits the theme of what you both have been talking about. But like having success is there's challenges that come along with it, right? Like being the number one team, the team people talk about, like that brings a whole different beast of challenges versus being the team that maybe is struggling to get a mojo going. And I think most of us have been on that side where, it's hard to ignore, whether it's the media, maybe you ignore the media, but it's hard to ignore the fact that like it starts to feel like, oh, winning just happens, right? Winning just happens. And you have to like actively fight that to go back to the roots of what you're talking about, of like focusing on the main thing. And it seems like on a personal level, like you guys are mature, you've been around the block. Mike's talking about being in his 6th year. Like have you guys been trying to message that to like the younger guys? Like I'm thinking of like a freshman or sophomore. They're like, oh, like I'm playing with these great seniors and we're winning and it's great. We're going to playoffs and we got momentum. And it's like, okay, well, the reason we're here is because of we've done all these things right throughout the year. And you guys know very well that if you stop doing those things, well, the success can go away with it. So wonder on like a team level, how much of you guys have leaders have just been like kind of beating that drum, demonstrating it with the way you act, but also like communicating that in the way you just speak with the team?
First of all, the credit I think starts with the coaches kind of bringing that up to us. But then I think it starts with the senior class. I know some of my buddies will not let it happen. One guy like Walker Wallace, he's a guy who stays on top of it, if we're talking about it at home, just certain little things, just trying to make sure that, we're not looking ahead. And even if you are thinking about it or talking about it, as a senior, there's guys who are younger than you who, process that a little bit differently and, might, change their mentality going into a Tuesday practice because we had a big win on Saturday. Just understanding that. And, I think the biggest part of it going into this year is, last year we were going into this week thinking that, we had the opportunity to make the tournament and, whether win or lose. And, unfortunately our name wasn't called on Selection Sunday. And, I think we had that urgency to start this year where, we had that tough loss to Penn State and we were like, hey, this, like it starts with, how you attack your week, how you attack your Monday. And, and that leads into game day, whether you want to believe it or not. It's just, how it trickles down. And so, that fuel that we had going into this year from, being, left out last year is something that, our senior class has kind of, wrapped their heads around and understood that those conversations in the locker room don't help anyone. So, I think that's kind of been where our head's at. And I don't know if Mike has anything more to add on that.
I've been in a leadership position for a few years now, just given my age, but it's always interesting talking about how you want to deal with it. And I think the first thing is you got to acknowledge it to some level. You can't just act like these pressures or these, all these things flying around don't exist. I think that's the first thing. But then all it is just making the conscious choice that, you're more mature than that. You're mentally mature that it doesn't matter what I read or what I hear. Or what position we are in, that doesn't change anything, right? Matt, like what you said, that doesn't change anything. We just need to get back and continue doing what got us here. So this year, more than anything, I'm taking the stance, we all know where we're at. Each guy, make the conscious choice, but no matter what mindset you want to take, just have the maturity that, that you're going to execute and that nothing's going to change and your roots are going to stay the same that they were on the beginning of the year.
Yeah, that's great. Another question I wanted to ask you guys is just around, your personal practice outside of regular practice. You don't get to this level and you don't get to be this good at this level without putting in a ton of work, whether that's throughout the summer, in the fall, and then obviously in season. So could you each talk about what your process kind of looks like, whether it's like a super organized one or if it's just, something you do all the time, but we'd love to hear what that work looks like outside of, the actual time that you have to be on the practice field.
First thing I'll say is like mine's had to change over, especially since I've gotten to college. I'll be candid with you. I've dealt with some health issues and I've always told the line of, sometimes less is more, or how can I maximize what I'm doing to be the best version of myself on Saturdays? I think for both of us, right, we take the preseason extremely seriously, and there are very few days off, and you're doing everything you can in your power. For me specifically, personally, when I get in season, a lot of mine is comes from up here. You got to reset yourself mentally each day. But I got to take an hour before even warm up start and practice, and raw at every part of my body and make sure I'm firing the way I can. I usually always get my stick in the hand, whether or not I'm actually shooting or doing anything constructive physically. As much as I sometimes don't want to admit, I'm visualizing some success and just getting the stick in my hands, and whether it's stringing the stick, making sure I'm dialed. It's just a mental thing. And I think it just feeds confidence into me, knowing that, I got everything figured out. I'm locked in, and that's more on my front. So Siege obviously he'll have a little different of an answer for it. I'll let him talk about it, but I think that guy shoots more lacrosse balls than anyone I've ever seen. And I've had times in my career where I've tried to match him and stay after practice for an hour, and I'm kind of at the point where I can't do as much of that anymore. I gotta get into the ice bath or get into film and think about other ways I can maximize. But Siege, I'll let you hop in because I know you got a lot of stuff you like to do.
Yeah, Mike is definitely a take care of your body guy and tries getting guys with him. But I'm kind of on the other end trying to convince guys to, I guess, stay outside a little bit longer. But yeah, no, I'm a huge believer in staying after practice and trying to get extra reps, trying to get extra shots. Going up to a defender and asking for another rep or two on, a certain move or whatnot. And I think that's kind of, always been what I've tried to do, stepping on campus here is, trying to spend as much time as I can after practice, on the field. And, I think as a leader trying to take guys with me, it was, a big part of it. And, I love nothing more than shooting after practice with Willem Firth or Hugh Keller or Goldie, messing around sometimes, having fun playing pig. But, I do try to dial it in and focus on, a certain player or something that I might have, thought I could have done better during practice. So, yeah, I definitely try my hardest to get as many shots up as possible as well. But just trying to have fun with it too, I think is the biggest part, especially now, looking at where we're at in the season and, finally the weather's turning here. So it's not freezing being outside. You do try to find the enjoyment in it. So, yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, guys, that's awesome. I mean, it's certainly relate, whether it's again some of that visualization or spending that extra time, and you don't really besides school have anywhere else to be, but be really present, and enjoy these last couple weeks. CJ, I'll start with you here to follow up, and then we'll finish off with one more for Mike. But kind of going off that, you're talking about your shooting, your routines, but at the same time, one of the things that you've really come to do at a very elite level is your off-ball play, which obviously when you're taking reps, you can't always rep out those same situations like the crafty cuts or your little spin cut or whatever it may be, when you're getting the after practice reps. But what would be some of your advice for playing without the ball? Either how to work on it or just how to be more mindful about it, for players that are trying to round out their games like yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. A lot of times, when I was younger, just go out there and put the bucket of balls at, 10 yards on the hash and try to see how many times I could hit top right. I guess that was kind of the mentality where I first started. But, for me, it kind of started, at school learning that, I was initially just playing on that left side, and I learned that, there wasn't much to it rather than, see curling when the ball is coming at me, in my right hand or, popping back out to my left, when Mikey had it on the right side. And, I think it was the mental side of it where, I learned the shots that I got during practice, I got during a game. And that was kind of where I started placing the balls when I would shoot. I think putting the balls on the opposite side and shooting my stick downfield was probably the hardest thing for me, and I always struggled trying to hit that far pipe, shooting cross body. And you try to put the deceptive, side of it, when you go out and, have the ball on that side, it makes it challenging. And I think that was kind of where, I found enjoyment in it, trying to, shoot a leaner top left and trying to shoot at 5 miles an hour. And, there's a couple weeks ago, we had a little hole in top left, and, I couldn't hit it for the life of me. And, Mikey kept bragging that, he hit it a couple of times, and it was just a couple of us, out there after practice. And, I told Mikey, hey, here's 15 balls. Like, I'm cutting towards you at 10 yards on the hash. And I'm trying to shoot this leaner right into the corner. And, eventually I got it, but, I had to speed it up a little bit. But, just trying to, understand where it comes from, understand that, stepping through the ball on that side and, just putting my right shoulder into it, and just the little things like that where I found enjoyment in it. And I think that's kind of where that off ball, shooting technique, took me to another level. So I think that's why I found the success.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's cool to hear, and I think it's the way you kind of simply put it, I think makes it more tangible for younger players to try to mix it in, because otherwise sometimes you can just go out there and you just revert back to what's the easiest to set up, which is the step downs or something. But, for a player that's trying to be more thoughtful, I think it's great advice. And, Mike, one thing I touched on it earlier, but what's impressed us a lot about your game is the balance, the scoring and the feeding. Would love to hear, what you'd attribute some of that to. I think in high school, it was pretty similar as well. And how have you grown your IQ over the years? Maybe it's film or, but, just would love to hear you touch on the balance and some of that in your game.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think first off, I think a lot of it does go back to high school. I played pretty early in my career, but I was at X and we had a pretty big system at Del Barton. And I think what it did though, it gave me kind of that quarterback sense. I was kind of running tempo and my coach was always in my ear. But, moving into college, I touched on it before, but I'm a firm believer that there's always a right play to be made on the field. And a lot of times, that it's such a subtle play to be made. And so for me, sometimes I'm out there and I feel like I'm not even doing anything. All I'm doing is cycling the ball through. But then I go back and watch on film. I'm like, that's the difference. I'm getting the ball in and out of my stick in half a second and allowing someone else to attack on the backside. But I think that, that's the first thing I'll say is that there's a right play to be made. And it's not getting so wrapped up in your own production. I think that's, especially we just talked about the social media and all that stuff, as an attackman, everyone loves talking about points and all that, but there's so many little plays to be made between the lines. Even in simple communication, telling a guy to cut, that's not showing up on the stat sheet, but those are things you could do when you're in the lineup all day long. And then the last piece is I've just been gifted with playing with so many great players. I mean, CJ's obviously one of them. I got to play with Jeff Teat in the early years of my career. John Piatelli was a hell of a player, still playing in the NLL. One of CJ and I's favorite player of all time. But, playing with those, I kind of felt an obligation to, play with your eyes up and make those better around you and share the wealth as much as you could. And so you talk about balance, and I know my numbers are pretty close together, but that's not a conscious thing at all. It's just trusting myself that I'm going to make the right play. And it makes it a hell of a lot easier when you're playing with some generational players, but buying into the system and just playing with that selfless attitude is really kind of the way I think I like to play the game.
Guys, I know you got practice here, and I got a full page of notes just in case I have to guard either one of you this summer. So just trying to get a little edge here. But I mean, I think Dean will probably wrap in a second. I just want to say, look, it's awesome having you guys on. Like, clearly, you got what's cool. You guys think about it in a way that we respect and really just like so about like the actual game, so about your teammates. And you clearly love it, which we always talk about, like with all the players we coach. If you don't like just love going and doing this stuff, I mean, it's really hard just to keep getting to the level people want to get to. And they sometimes try to put the cart before the horse and look at the things they need to do. But it's like, does it light you up to go out and shoot balls with your buddies and push each other? And just hearing you guys talk about it, it's like clear how much fun you guys have playing and just how much you get out of the whole experience.
Yeah, Matt, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, just reflecting over it, I don't like pumping up CJ too much, but I said part of the reason I'm playing is because of him, but it's really, I mean, you could hear it through this call, right? It's the energy. It's the feeling that CJ and I always talk about it, but any day you can get your stick in your hand, a lacrosse stick, and playing lacrosse with boys, it's the best day ever. And you got to have that mentality every time you're out here. I'm closing up my college career here, and as you guys know more than anyone, life comes at you pretty fast. And so anytime you get the chance to play lacrosse, it's so great. And it's a great game. And, I'm just blessed to be able to do it with such great people.
To wrap up here, I think just through this call and getting to know you guys a bit, it's it's evident the bond you and your teammates have created. Wishing you guys the best going forward, and I think only fitting that Mikey, you assisted CJ for the record-setting goal, and a moment that I know you guys will share for forever after this season. So really cool. Wishing you guys both the best going forward, and thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate you guys. All right, moving on from that great interview here, we are shifting gears to our GPUs, which are our games, players, and units. Deemer, why don't you kick us off here?
All right, my game and unit ties in, but my game was the Boston College North Carolina rematch for the ACC finals on the women's side. Another big win for the Tar Heels. They continue to show why right now they're the best team in the country. But even more impressive, I think the supporting cast really stepped up. BC ran a double face guard for the majority of the game. Eliza Osborne stepped up with 3 goals and 5 to 6 draw controls. Kate Levy, another freshman, huge, impactful coast to coast, caused turnover to transition goal. And they were just awesome to watch. Even players like Marissa White, Caroline Godin, have been so solid all season. And then my unit is the North Carolina draw unit, 19 wins on the day. Sophie Student also had 6 draw controls, but even more impressive, 9 wins in the fourth quarter alone. They outdrew BC 9-1 in the fourth quarter. So that's my game and unit for the week. Player, I have 2. One, Logan Ip, Harvard midfielder, 5 goals against Brown. Big outing. He's got 35 points on the season, shooting 51% as a midfielder. He's a guy I got to know back in California. Incredibly hardworking, especially during COVID. So awesome to see him really step up and have a big day. And then freshman Jack Ransom, 9 goals for Georgetown. Incredible outing, couple goals away from some big time records in a single game. He's played midfield for most of the season. And then, recently kind of transitioned it back into attack, which is where he was recruited, and had a fantastic outing. So shout out to both those guys. And that wraps it up for me for this week.
My GPUs for the week, it does kill me to say, because it wasn't a great game for Syracuse, but UNC's win over Syracuse 14-12. UNC came out on fire. They played really well. My player wraps into this with Dom Petramala, 6 goals on 20 shots. Just an incredible performance for him. I think he's one of, if not the toughest attackman in the country. Also a guy that, I think he started something like 0 for 9 shooting, and he doesn't flinch, right? He just continues to put himself in a good position to score. His dad was on the Syracuse coaching staff for 2 years as a defensive coordinator. So felt like there was a lot of passion coming from him in that game. So had to shout him out. And then my unit is also from UNC, the UNC faceoff unit. Brady Wambach, 59% versus Johnny Mullen. These are 2 All-American Fogos. I believe they were mid-season first and second team All-Americans. And, proved to be, pretty meaningful stat in this game. It ended up being a little bit closer by the end of the game with that little run that Syracuse went on. But, UNC, really solid team, and had to shout them out, even though tough loss for Syracuse.
And we were talking earlier, the thing about, Dom shooting 20 shots, hitting 6 of them. I feel like his shot doesn't get saved very much, though. I don't have any data on that. But when you watch the game, like we were talking about it, he's either putting that in the goal or missing the goal.
Yeah, it's like that shot's either spraying or, it's not like any like clean saves are really made. And, I think Jimmy McColl's a really good goalie, and don't quote me, I don't know how many saves he had, especially on Petramala. He had a ton of saves in that game, and he really helped them out. But also Petramala, the way that he shoots like that overhand bouncer is pretty incredible too. A lot of pace on that ball.
It's like Ryan Brownish a little bit on the overhand.
Yeah, not as smooth as Ryan Brown, but it's
that snap, that high release, that snap low. All right, moving on here. My game was Duke UVA. Before I go into that, just a quick shout out to I didn't make this my game, but Marquette beating Denver. Jake Richards, first year as the head coach. Marquette, that's a huge win for the program and for Coach Richards, and going to the Big East tournament. And they've had I don't want to say an up and down year, but in a way they have. And that's just a big win for them. So really cool to see that. My game, Duke UVA, so a 10-9 game. That is Duke's 20th straight regular season win over UVA, which just in itself is a crazy stat. And we were talking about it. This would be the year, that you'd kind of think, given how UVA season's been going, they're like, maybe they'll put together an effort and actually win this game. And they almost did, right? It was, overtime game. And Patrick Jamison, 14 saves, saved at 61%, but had, I think, 2 really big overtime saves. One that, a really good look for UVA and kind of ended up right under Jamison. He fell on it. So he was a big part of that game. I think you just saw, Duke able to be resilient throughout it and finish that game strong. My player, I think obviously we just had CJ Kirst on for the interview. None of us chose him. He just set the goal scoring record. So there's a caveat there, but I went Kyle Lehman of Penn State. Kyle was 4-1 in their win over Hopkins, and watching that game, just scored in different ways. And I think like a smart player that's capable of scoring unassisted goals, attacked and was covered by Quentin Kilrain, is a very good defender for Hopkins, was able to attack and approach one time to get a goal, was able to set a pick to get a switch and a short stick and take it to the cage, moved well off the ball and had a nice assist, pretty two-handed. So I just thought played a good overall game for them, had 5 points and helped them in that win over Hopkins. And lastly, my unit, this is more of I would say a season award than specifically this weekend, but it's Richmond's defense. They held St. Joe's to 7 goals this weekend, but they're number 3 in the country in scoring defense, giving up 7.86 goals per game after Army and Maryland. They're clearing the ball at 91%. They've given up double digits 5 times this year, 12 goals to Maryland, 12 to Cornell, 12 to Duke. Those are their 3 losses of the season for Richmond. They gave up 12 to Georgetown and 10 to UVA. So 5 times they've given up double-digit goals, and in 3 of those games are their only losses. So I think Richmond's a strong overall team, but I think this defensive unit has been very solid for them. And just a guy that I really like, Hunter Smith, number 6, I think is an absolute stud down there. A guy that, if you're ever able to watch Richmond play, watching him cover the ball, he's a great athlete, really tough to beat, awesome feet, strong, understands angles. And so that's just a unit that I think it's kind of harder to track because they're not, we're not seeing in these big ACC, Big Ten, and Ivy League games as much, but they've been a big part of Richmond now having the success they've had this year. We'll keep it moving here. We're going to get to the breakdown, which is a deep dive into concept, trends, or skills that we're seeing or find interesting. We were talking about, guys, this week, and Deemer, you mentioned it, seeing a lot of dodging of the slide. I think we've mentioned before, Owen Duffy's a guy, that's done this a few times. I think the interesting conversation that I'd like to pick your guys' brain on a little bit is, when's a good time to dodge the slide? When's a good time to redodge? I think a lot of players are self-conscious about over carrying, or they're told to draw a slide and move it, which is not in itself bad advice, but is not always the case, because you're seeing players, working these redodges against a matchup or working these redodges versus slide. So, Deemer, you want to take the first crack maybe at trying to map out some of the things you've been seeing and some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion. And I think it's something that in my head, even thinking about what we talked about earlier in the season, where I kind of made a pushback on the advice of changing planes when you shoot, as that being this consistent advice that's given, very similar to the idea of, hey, always draw a slide and move it. And we just, as we watch more film, we just see more situations where not every guy is always just drawing a slide and moving it. And different teams are playing different matchups and sliding to different people in different ways. And so it also goes off the idea that just because a defense slides doesn't mean they're sliding correctly or always with good technique, and that not all defenders, might just not make a mistake. And so I think when you think about that, there's times where you can manipulate the slide. You can use posture to slow that slide down or get that defender to chase stick. But if they take bad angles, I think there's different spots on the field, like a sweep or down the alley where you can run around it. And then the person who was originally on ball is now in a trail position to both the dodger and the slider. And so you're not actually trapped between the two defenders that are doubling, but then you're carrying that double and delaying that recovery process even more, which I think opens up opportunities on the backside. So I think there's just some benefit to realizing that it's not always black and white.
I think it kind of hits some things we've talked about of like, it's not that draw, slide, and move, it's necessarily bad advice. It's like good advice to give at the right context, but it doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. And Deemer, I'm thinking about the flip side of it, because we've talked about before these like defensive misconceptions or these like sound bites or phrases that coaches almost say because they've heard them so much, but maybe it's not the right thing. One of them is like slide to collide is the reverse version of this. Like you don't want to slide to collide, generally speaking. If a guy runs through the middle of the defense is about to finish, yeah, you're going to collide on the slide. But you want to slide to neutralize the dodger and contain it, because if as a defense, your slide gets dodged, Deemer, to your point, now you have two guys on the ball and you need to send a third to stop them and you're all out of whack. And so I think to your point, it's like as a defense, if you don't execute well, you might slide at the right time, but if you don't slide to neutralize the dodger and an offense takes advantage of that, now you're in an even worse spot. So it's just like understanding some of those things are good coaching points to teach players within context, but it doesn't universally mean it's bad to dodge a slide or it's bad to collide on a slide as a defender, but it's not always the best advice to give.
Yeah, one way that I think about it, it's a little bit different, I guess, like from, approaching it from like an ex-attackman or an attackman's point of view. This is something that I learned a lot growing up watching Steele Stamkos. I know we've talked about a lot, and then I really saw Lyle Thompson implement it, playing with him in the PLL. But as an attackman, like, say you have that defender on you, you get to GLE and someone slides from the crease or across the crease, and suddenly you're kind of getting doubled. One thing that I think is extremely effective, I think that can be a hard place to like redodge, and maybe that's just from like my perspective. I didn't have like I wasn't about to redodge the slide most times. But what I think is really effective is when you get to that point, and the two defenders are on you, just continue to drag them out, right? So if I get to GLE, now I'm dragging them out to the sideline, right? Continuing to move my feet. And, it does two things. One, it gets your hands free, obviously, so that you can get a nice clean pass off. But two, you're dragging those defenders out. Okay, now 10 yards, 12 yards, 15 yards away from the crease. And now when you move that ball, you're moving it into a 5-on-4, right? So you're getting some odd man situations from it with your team. So I think that becomes really effective. Like I said, I thought Steele Stamkos was masterful at that, like getting to GLE, gets doubled. Now he starts pulling everyone out, gets those hands free, but he's really pulling people. Right. And if those defenders are going to commit and it's almost like baiting them, right, you got to have like the composure. And I think that's where Lyle really comes into play. He's so composed, getting checked and just handling that pressure. But, really high level quarterbacks, I think, do a phenomenal job of that at X.
There's a really good, I was actually watching with one of our athletes this week, some Steele Stanwick highlights. And I believe it was against Drexel, maybe Steele's 2010 season. He bounces away, they slide pole to pole, and the pole immediately recovers, and then he rolls back underneath. I think that also happens a lot, like short to short. Like if shorties slide to shorties, the shorty will peel off and be like, holy crap, I have to recover. And then the roll back or the bounce and redodge that direction opens up and presents itself. For our women's listeners, someone who I think has done a really good job of not just moving it right away when the double comes is Madison Taylor for Northwestern. She does it a little interesting where she'll actually, because her stick is so good, she can kind of backpedal and shuffle backwards and just drag the double to her face. But the constraint that's different in the women's game is that the checks to the body and the like crunch and collapse of the defense can't happen as much. So she can back up and retreat and drag the double and manipulate the double, and they can't like fully go all out at her like you can in the men's game. So that in and of itself too creates a different element where you can teach them, I think, to drag and maintain that double. But then I think back to a player, Kelsey Huff, that I coached at USC. When she would sweep, she was impossible to slide to. Like the adjacent most of the slides in the women's game are adjacent, and then she would just hop around. And it's so hard to find this balance of containing. Charges are rarely called in the women's game. If you stay too wide, they'll split the gap, and then you're trying to swipe at the head for and you get called for a foul. So I think in the women's game too, like, it's just striking this balance of your Dodgers being playmakers and not just being deterred so quickly by a double team.
Yeah, and a phrase I like, and I think about a lot of this from the defensive side, but defense is just like the inverse of offense. So if an offense does something well, it makes it hard to play defense. If they do it poorly, it makes it easier to play defense, right? And what you guys are talking about a little bit, I think of like, does that offense let you off the hook, right? Or do they actually make you execute at a high level? And so, like, if I'm going to slide, if Steven Rafis is dodging and I'm going to slide, I have to slide at a good angle. I have to break down, and our recovery guy has to release the right way at the right time. And if he doesn't, well, Steven's going to read that gap and play off of it. Or if we slide too far, he's not just going to throw it to nobody. He's going to drag it and exploit it. And so what happens is, like, if a team just sees a slide and just throws it to a non-dangerous guy or something because of that, and maybe we had a bad slide, maybe the guy recovered poorly, but they just let us off the hook because the guy didn't test it probe, or the girl didn't test it or probe or anything. And it's the same with a redodge. If Steven's like, and actually this is how Steven played. Like, I remember playing against you in 21, Steven, with the Cannons, and we had to short you because you guys had Rabel at the midfield too. And Steven didn't just dodge one time, and if our short stick drove him down the side, he didn't just pass it. He bounced, squared him up again, and then he split again and rolled again. So now as a defense, you're like, you half slide because when you start to go, he pops away, and it's not over carrying. Like, you were putting a ton of pressure on us. And it makes sense you would watch Steele, because Steele was really good at that. He kind of manipulated the players and what they were doing, and didn't just like, oh, guy came, move it, right? And that, like, just moving it robotically lets the defense off the hook. It doesn't make us actually have to, like, read and play and sit in the stance and turn our head and have great spacing. And so I do think it's maybe a challenge, but there is that feel component where you watch some of these players that do it well. They don't let the defense off the hook. Like, if I have a bad stance, like, you're going to make me pay. If I slide too far, you're going to make me pay. And things like that. So I just think, like, it's maybe a nuanced skill, but the best players, they find a way to understand when's the right time to move it and when's the time to keep pressing until you really force the defense to have to, like, commit to you and make the play, and then you're able to manipulate that.
Yeah, and just one thing on that, I think I remember watching an interview with Lyle Thompson when he was in college, and was asking about, just like his dodging techniques. And what he said is, I'm not focused on the guy that's guarding me. I'm focused on the other 5 guys on defense and how they're moving. So obviously, that's super high level, and he's a guy that can, beat most defenders, but he's constantly manipulating what the defense is doing. He's not just worried and so focused on, like, his one-on-one matchup, which is ultimately a lot of what this conversation comes down to, right? You can go ahead and dominate one-on-one drills and, get to the goal every time. But when you actually get in team offense and now someone's going to slide to you, what does that look like, right? So just being prepared for that before you even start your dodge, I do think is important.
Steve, one question I would love to hear your thoughts on, and then I'll chime in. But I know you've been doing a great job with our athletes from a film study perspective, and I know you've gotten the question a few times, balancing, hey, I don't want to be a ball hog. Coach is telling me to just draw and move it. But how do you differentiate the difference? How can players that are listening to this, or even parents that are watching every single game and they're trying to understand the role of their child and what they should or shouldn't be doing, what's been some of your advice and what you've seen there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something I think about a lot, and I think it varies from player to player, right? A lot of times I'll say, like, this is what the gray area can be of lacrosse, right? There's so much that goes into different things. So it's not like a clear answer, but, what's the time of the game? How have you been playing during this game? Is one of your teammates really hot, or are you in a good position where, okay, maybe I've been practicing my low angle lefty shot for weeks now. So, I can take that, but my teammate that hasn't been, they can't. So a lot of this comes down to, like, the overarching theme is game IQ, right? Which you're going to get through watching film, watching college lacrosse, watching yourself back, right? I think it's so helpful. And, most teams have access to it now, high school players. You can go back and watch your huddle, right? And see what the game looks like. It's a totally different viewpoint, and it's really going to change your game. So I think from that perspective, a lot of it comes down to IQ, but it's like, all right, how do you teach IQ? Right. And it's just, without having like a direct example in front of me, I think it's just figuring out, and it's a lot of what Michael Long was saying, like there is a right play to be made. Right. And I think that's also being honest with yourself, being honest with your teammates, becomes important.
There's going to be a difference too in where you sit on the team and what your role is, in terms of the leash that you're given. And I think that's a really hard thing for even parents who are supporting their players to understand is how a coach, thinks about a junior or a senior and what they can do and how they can shoot or how long they can hold the ball is going to be different from a second line player or a player on the fringe or a sophomore or freshman sometimes. And you really earn that leash through your time in the program, whether it's high school or college. And I just think it's kind of the way it is. And so it doesn't mean that there's not going to be different situations. And I think the default thing that people might point to is, oh, politics or playing favorites. But people and coaches like do have their people. They have their people that they inherently give a little more trust or leeway to. And that's okay, and it's this two-way thing. Like it doesn't mean that we support coaches having a complete lack of transparency and not helping players get better and have conversations and things like that. But at the same time, too, it does have to be acknowledged that that can account for some of the difference in maybe perceived treatment, or what you can do. So it is, again, it's that in and of itself is a whole gray area, a whole nother conversation for another player's perspective. But again, this idea of dodging, dragging the double, working around it. Like there's certainly situations. And I do, at the end of the day, guys, I do want to give a shout out here to Colin Mayer, committed to Brown, and Quinn Langton going to Penn. They've been crushing some film review and film breakdowns and chopping up clips for FCL, interning with us all spring. And, it's something that they've been noticing as well. It's been really cool to see their growth and what they're cutting up and adding. So I just want to shout those two guys out. Two high IQ players, both seniors going to play in college. So keep it up, fellas. We appreciate you guys.
Two of your points are, well, all your points are like spot on, but right, the transparency, like we say it all the time. I feel like I at least do. It's like you have to look yourself in the mirror and be honest with yourself. Are you a second line mini or are you a starting attackman? Did you take a low angle righty shot? Okay, well, did you just go 3-2 this weekend, or did you get 5 runs? Well, then it's not going to be treated the same if it's missed, and that's just a reality. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, to be honest. And then from the second point, just texting, and we were in a group chat with CJ Kirst and Michael Long before, right? And the two of them are talking about Michael Long's like, I don't think you'll find two bigger lax rats than me and CJ Kirst, right? And then we're talking about our interns that we have. And I think lacrosse is getting to the point, everyone's getting so good and it's becoming, more professionalized. And it's like these sports like football and basketball. And, it's not there yet, but it's getting there from like the obsession standpoint. And I think what people have to remember at the end of the day, like, even just now talking to like high school kids trying to get recruited, like you have to be obsessed with it. You have to be putting in this time. You have to watch film, right? And that doesn't mean it has to be a chore. It can be fun, but I think it's so important. And we really do see it. Like the kids that do that, the kids that are watching college lacrosse, the kids that are actually noticing what's happening, they're the kids that end up making it. And guys like CJ Kirst, Michael Long, they're a perfect example of that. And two guys, like how excited were they to let us know how big of lax rats they are? How excited were they to come on the podcast, talk about lacrosse? Just as they're about to go out here, we're recording this on a Tuesday, they're about to get out to Cornell practice, and prepare for the biggest time of their season, which starts on Friday in the Ivy League tournament.
Yeah. And I'll quickly hit on that. I had one thing I wanted to say too. On that point, it reminds me of last year we had Jamison Kester, the Hopkins defensive coordinator, on for a defensive webinar in our coaches community. And at the end, we're talking about like, hey, what are some things, they can't be too specific, but like when you're recruiting a player, like what are some things like that you consider like you want to see? And he was like, I like talking defense with guys and seeing if they light up. And he said it in a much funnier way than I am, like seeing if they get some sweat on their brow and seeing if, and he's like, I want to talk approaches and like slides. And I want to see this. I want to see this kid go back and forth with me on this, because you want somebody like, if you get somebody that loves it and how much like the coaches know at college, you have 4 years, but how much you're going to be able to deliver to that player, it depends on like how receptive and how into it they are. So if you love it and you're obsessed, like your ceiling is very high. But we've all seen guys and girls flatline in college too, where it's very low trend because they do what they do and they're pretty good at it, but they don't love it. Right. Just thinking about like I've been thinking about like this, how do you know the over carry versus the redodge and all this stuff? I think you can break lacrosse. You can break lacrosse into a lot of different ways. You can break all these sports, but offense and lacrosse, you're really doing two things. You have to do two things to be successful. You have to create an advantage and you have to capitalize on the advantage. That you can't score to score, you have to create, you have to get past to somebody to get to a dangerous area. You created an advantage. When you create that advantage, you have to capitalize on it. Maybe somebody slides and the new advantage is the pass, and they have to capitalize and score. And so when you're carrying, are you creating an advantage? Did you beat your player to a dangerous area to get a shot, or did you draw another player to you? Did you create an advantage? And are you able to capitalize on it? And so what coaches are looking at is the pieces that fit together to create and capitalize on advantages well together. If you have a bunch of advantage creators but no capitalizers, well, then it's your offense is going to struggle. And if you have a bunch of capitalizers but nobody can actually create the advantage, your offense is going to struggle. The best players can do both. Jeff Teat can create advantages, and Jeff Teat can capitalize on advantages. Steele Stanwick can beat a guy. Steele Stanwick can also find the open guy. He also finish the shot. Tom Schreiber can create advantages. Tom Schreiber can capitalize on advantages. And so, like, you're kind of looking at it through that lens, like, what are you doing? Are you carrying the ball? Are you creating an advantage? If so, okay, great. Did you capitalize on the advantage you created? If no, then, you're kind of hurting rather than helping.
Well, it's also, where are you moving towards? You're creating the advantage, but also are you moving in the direction of somewhere where then you can capitalize on that advantage, or are you moving away from the cage to lower angle spots, or you're running east west at 16? Well, that's the time to get rid of it, versus if you're angling down to the cage and you're getting to a better spot, there's going to be times where you can manipulate and carry that more. It kind of reminds me of man up offense too. If you were to view in the lens of if everyone always caught and chopped for 2 seconds, or 1.5 seconds, the flow on man up would stink. But everyone's got different roles and not every spot needs to be like a shopping role. There's, guy catches it at top center. He might be looking inside through, but when a guy catches it on the wing or down low, it's a quick look and a move it, And so I think understanding like your role in that too, just like, again, if no one's winning matchups, well, maybe the alpha guy or girl in your offense needs to dodge for longer and keep going. But that's probably not going to be the 7th or 8th option that's in that next shift. So that's where knowing your role matters too. But then if someone's getting really hot, winning a short stick matchup consistently, well, let's get the ball out of our stick so that we can get it to their stick and they can start the party and get things going. And I think that flow of a game and understanding the defensive scout, that can impact those decisions too.
Yeah, and it's like what is any offensive game plan? It's like like people talk about sets, they talk about principles, they talk about initiations. It's just the coach deciding which way do we think we can best create the first advantage. And then any other action is when we create this advantage, here's how I think would be good spacing to capitalize on the advantage. And the defense, like I scout a team, I go, where do they get the advantage from? They're going to isolate our short sticks, and based off the personnel, it's going to be on this wing because these 3 players are probably the guys that we're most worried about. Okay, how are they going to capitalize? Well, if we don't slide, they're going to go to the goal. And if we do slide, they usually throw it here or here because these players, they just are more comfortable making this pass. And so you just play, it's all advantage creation, all advantage capitalization, and that's where goals come from. All right, pushing into our last segment, Steven, looking ahead into this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, so it's conference tournament weekend on the men's side. We are recording this on a Tuesday, but it will drop Friday. We're going to have some games that would have already taken place on Tuesday night. Not positive about Wednesday, but I know Thursday night as well with the Big Ten semifinals. But what we have to look forward to, Friday night, 5 p.m. ACC tournament starts, Syracuse versus Notre Dame. That's followed by UNC versus Duke at 8 p.m. That championship for the ACCs will be at noon on Sunday. Flipping over to the Ivy League tournament, kind of the same timeline. First game is at 4 p.m. Friday, Cornell versus Yale. Second game is Princeton versus Harvard at 6:30. That championship will be at 1 p.m. on Sunday. The Big Ten tournament will be the championship that we don't know who's going to be in it yet at the time of recording, like I just said, but that championship is going to be Saturday night at 8 p.m. And then the other tournament that stands out to me is just the Patriot League tournament. Semifinals are going to be Friday at 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. That championship game will be Sunday at 11:30 a.m. That's a big tournament and could potentially, alter what a lot of bubble teams might be looking at come, selection show on Sunday night, which we'll have. So, a huge weekend coming up, really good time to be a lacrosse fan. Whether you're a parent or whether you're the student athlete that's in high school trying to get recruited right, pay attention to these games. Some of the best lacrosse is being played right now, and we have, an exciting month ahead.
Yeah, and with that, we're going to wrap up this week. Guys, awesome episode. Really appreciate everyone tuning in. Really looking forward to even going back ourselves and pulling out more nuggets and ideas from CJ and Michael. They were awesome guests. If you're listening and you have ideas for future player perspectives or breakdowns that you'd like to hear us talk about, please email contact@firstclasslax.com. We'd love to incorporate some of that into future episodes. We probably have 4 or 5 shows remaining to wind down the season here. But looking forward to another great weekend of lacrosse, conference tournaments, and selection show coming up. And guys, have a great rest of the week and weekend.
See you guys.